So whenever he passed that way, he would stop there for a meal. She said to her husband, "Look, I am sure that this man who regularly passes our way is a holy man of God. Let us make a small roof chamber with walls and put there for him a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp, so that he can stay there whenever he comes to us." One day when he came there, he went up to the chamber and lay down there. He said to his servant Gehazi, "Call the Shunammite woman." When he had called her, she stood before him. He said to him, "Say to her, since you have taken all this trouble for us, what may be done for you? Would you have a word spoken on your behalf to the king or to the commander of the army?" She answered, "I live among my own people." He said, "What then may be done for her?" Gehazi answered, "Well, she has no son, and her husband is old." He said, "Call her." When he had called her, she stood at the door. He said, "At this season, in due time, you shall embrace a son." She replied, "No, my lord, O man of God, do not deceive your servant." The woman conceived and bore a son at that season, in due time, as Elisha had declared to her. When the child was older, he went out one day to his father among the reapers. He complained to his father, "Oh, my head, my head." The father said to his servant, "Carry him to his mother." He carried him and brought him to his mother. The child sat on her lap until noon, and he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, closed the door on him, and left. Then she called to her husband and said, "Send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys, so that I may quickly go to the man of God and come back again." He said, "Why go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath." She said, "It will be all right." Then she saddled the donkey and said to her servant, "Urge the animal on. Do not hold back from me unless I tell you." So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. When the man of God saw her coming, he said to Gehazi, his servant, "Look, there is the Shunammite woman. Run at once to meet her and say to her, 'Are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is the child all right?'" She answered, "It is all right." When she came to the man of God at the mountain, she caught hold of his feet. Gehazi approached to push her away, but the man of God said, "Let her alone, for she is in bitter distress. The Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me." Then she said, "Did I ask my Lord for a son? Did I not say, 'Do not mislead me'?" He said to Gehazi, "Gird up your loins and take my staff in your hand and go. If you meet anyone, give no greeting, and if anyone greets you, do not answer, and lay my staff on the face of the child." Then the mother of the child said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave without you." So he rose up and followed her. Gehazi went on ahead and laid the staff on the face of the child, but there was no sound or sign of life. He came back to meet him and told him, "The child has not awakened." When Elisha came into the house, he saw the child lying dead on his bed. So he went in and closed the door on the two of them and prayed to the Lord. Then he got up on the bed and lay upon the child, putting his mouth upon his mouth, his eyes upon his eyes, and his hands upon his hands. And while he lay bent over him, the flesh of the child became warm. He got down, walked once to and fro in the room, then got up again and bent over him. The child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. Elisha summoned Gehazi and said, "Call the Shunammite woman." So he called her. When she came to him, he said, "Take your son." She came and fell at his feet, bowing to the ground. Then she took her son and left.
Let us go ahead and pray. God, I thank you for the opportunity to come together to hear your word. As you continue, would you continue to speak to us, and may we feel and sense your presence. We thank you for this day. In Jesus' name, amen. Angela, thank you so much for reading that very long passage. But I wanted us to hear the whole story. So today's sermon is titled, "It's Gonna Be All Right." It is challenging to hold on to hope when tragedy and trauma are perpetually unfolding from one news cycle to the next. When we experience social or personal loss and despair, it can be difficult to remain hopeful. It is even harder to put our hope into action. Today, we are continuing the sermon series, reading the Bible from the margin and looking at the life of the Shunammite woman in 2 Kings, who declares, like Kendrick Lamar, that it's going to be all right, even though change has yet to come. This declaration is not a denial of reality or even an overused saying to mask the pain and to pretend that nothing is wrong. Rather, her response reflects her faith and hope in action as she uses her agency and seeks God for the change, restoration, and healing she needs in her life, her family, and community. You know, I hate that saying, "When life gives you lemons, make lemonade," mostly because I don't like lemonade. Often when we talk about that saying and other platitudes, they feel empty and devoid of the reality that exists. Yet there is something still within those platitudes and saying. Beyonce devoted an entire project entitled Lemonade, and in it she documented the struggle it took for her as she navigated personal and social traumas that she was experiencing. The book of Kings is full of violence and war. It is the story of the people of God under the rule of the prophets and kings. At the same time, it is a battle between the prophets and the kings, each requiring different things from the people of God. And while the kings shift power and the prophets call the people back to God, the lives of the Israelites and the other inhabitants around them continue to be impacted by the civil unrest. At the same time, people are also dealing with personal and family issues. In 2 Kings 4, we take a break from the battles between the prophets and the kings to look at miracles performed by Elisha the prophet. And we're invited into the lives of 4 different groups of people. In 3 of these instances, Elijah instructs people how to be active in the miracle that unfolds. But with the Shunammite woman, something is different about her situation. The story is not about what Elisha can do for her, but rather about a woman who sees and responds as she puts her hope and faith in action for herself and others in her community. The story of the Shunammite woman is different. Unlike the widow that opens this chapter, the Shunammite woman does not have any physical or financial need. She does not have any need for her family either. Verse 8 tells us that in fact, she's the opposite of the widow. She is a well-to-do, wealthy woman. She does not have any lack. In fact, she has an abundance of resources which she shares with Elisha. The way that a woman is portrayed in this passage is different than how we normally see women portrayed. Typically, women are submissive wives and mothers with their identity being defined in relationship to their family. But here in this passage, we see the ways in which the Shunammite woman continues to subvert the power dynamics. Even though she goes unnamed, she is independent and is described as a woman with means, denoting her position in society. Her husband is defined in relationship to her, allowing her to be the center of her narrative and story. And because she continues to break through the power dynamics, it is her who does many of the actions throughout the narrative. She is the one that invites and urges the prophet to come to dinner. She intuits that Elijah is a man of God, Elisha. She comes up with the idea to make a space for Elisha and encourages her husband to work with her as they together build and construct a room with walls for him on their roof. And when Elisha seeks to maintain control and the norms by speaking through his servant Gehazi, she responds to Elisha several times directly, even though he does not speak directly to her. Elisha, like the others in the story, responds to the woman's initiative. She is not just a woman of means, but one with a voice and authority, one in whom people respect and follow, one who uses her position, her voice, and agency not simply for herself, but for the communal well-being. Elisha wants to respond to her generosity, but he isn't quite sure what to do. So he summons her like a servant and asks through Gehazi, what is it that could be done for her? In verse 13, we see that he wants to know what ways can he use his power and influence on her behalf. The Shunammite woman responds by saying, I'm good. She tells the prophet that she lives among her people. There isn't anything she is in need of or even wants from the prophet, the king, or the army. She has her people and her home. Within her response, we can understand that being among her people means that should a need arise, her people got her back. She didn't need assistance or a handout from him. It is not a false humility. She genuinely does not need him to open a door for her, invite her to a table, or leverage who he knows for her benefit. She has made her way with her people. It is not simply a self-made, I pulled myself and I did it all by myself and I don't need anyone, but rather she is with and among her people. She had learned how to navigate the world and activate her agency in a way that was authentic to her and her people. She was living. She was not bound, but living. She was thriving, flourishing among her people. No doubt she had seen the casualties of war. The ways war had made widows and fatherless children that found their ways into debtors' prisons, that brought home fathers who were emotionally unavailable and never quite the same. She had what she needed and was fine in that interconnected, interdependent community. Yet, her response does not sit well with Elisha. It is not that God intervenes and reveals to him what may be in her heart. Based on Elisha's response, we can see that he believes there must be something she needs for him to do. He could not fathom a reality where he was not deemed an essential worker. He's used to being able to use his power as the holy man of God to bestow miracles on folks like the widow and her family that he helped in verses 1-7. He is used to the people of God coming to him to meet a need. He's used to using his position to carry favor to those in his inner circle. Sometimes we can make it about us and not about God. But I also believe that Elisha has become used to transactional exchanges. Even though when the Israelites left Egypt and were invited to live into a Sabbath reality that moves away from using people like commodities and goods, somehow that frame of mind slipped back in of seeing people in transactional ways. When you live in a world where folks are always asking for something in return, you do not know how to receive a gift as just a gift. There is a pressure to return in kind, but it can get more complicated if it feels like you must then one-up them. He did not believe her. He did not take her at her word. He could not believe her when she said she had what she needed and didn't need or want anything from him. And because the men do not believe her, there are presumptions that are made. Elisha and Gehazi began to have a conversation about what the Shunammite woman needs. It seems to almost move away from paying her back or expressing gratitude to kind of demonstrate and prove that their work matters. Gehazi reminds Elijah that she does not have a child, nor son or heir since her husband is old. The Shunammite woman isn't barren in this story. Scripture is always pointing out when women are barren. But here, we just learned she doesn't have any children. And it alludes to the fact that her husband is well up in age and more than likely the reason they don't have children. And I get why both the men may believe that what is in her best interest is to have a son. I get why in a culture that defines women based on their relationship and proximity to the men in their life, how they would assume that what she needed was a son, that she needed these men to act on her behalf. And I get that it's possible that their intentions were really to care about her long-term benefit should her aging husband pass away. But what I do not get is how it is okay for men to make decisions about what happens to, in, and with her body. I don't get how they think it's okay to make this decision without even consulting God. I don't get how they think it would be okay. They asked her the first time, why not the second? Why was it so hard to just believe what this woman said? Why not take the time as men of God to even seek God to see and discern what she actually needed? Maybe she did not want a son in a country that had only had spouts and short periods of the peace, depending on who was in charge. Maybe her people and her tribe was really all she needed. Maybe she had established herself in other ways. Could it be that she didn't have a desire to be a mother? If we can fathom that men may not have a desire to be fathers, then why can't we fathom that for women? But we won't know why she is childless. We don't get to know her journey and story. We don't get to know what decisions she and her partner made about their family structure because neither of them are invited into the conversation concerning their lives. We don't know if they experienced heartache trying to conceive. People get to make their own choices about their family life and structure. And we don't need to get involved in their business unless we are invited into it. It is not our place to speculate the ways or judge how they run their home. Instead, we ought to support them as best we can. If we see that harm is being done, of course we should intervene. But let's not presume we know what's best for other people's family structure in life. She's not included in the decision. So the agency we've seen her activate throughout this passage is taken away as they seek to make a decision about what happens to and in and with her body. When they summon her to come before Elisha again in verse 15, and she stands at the door and he proclaims in verse 16 that at this time next year she'll embrace or hold a son in her arms, we maybe can understand why she is responding with a no, my Lord. And while the full extent of what her complete response represents, what is clear is she said no. She refuses, she resists. This is not what she wants. This is not like the laugh that Sarah gives when she overhears the man of God telling Abraham she's going to have a baby. This is not like Zechariah's response of how this could be when he heard about John the Baptist. The phrase, no, my Lord, is only used a few other times in scripture in this way, in Judges 19:23 and in 2 Samuel 13:12. And in those cases, it was when folks were telling people, no, they didn't want to lay with them. They didn't want to be sexually violated. And while I'm not saying that's what's happened here, I don't know what transpired, and greater theologians than me are split on the issue of exactly what went down. But I don't want to skip over the fact that we do see men and men of God rape women in scripture multiple times. And in this passage, it is unclear what happens. But what is clear is that she resisted because she didn't want others deciding what was happening to, with, and in her body. Her response also indicates that there is a level of distrust towards Elisha at this point, that there are ways in which she believes there might be a deception of sorts. Many commentators have attributed this to her possible prophetic abilities. In verse 9, in her knowing that he was a man of God, and her even foreshadowing not the loving embrace that Elijah describes, but the way her son will sit in her lap later on and die. Maybe she has sat with other parents whose sons didn't make it back from these wars. Maybe she's nursed people and seen a lot more death and despair among her people. Whatever the case may be, this is not what she wants. In the NIV version, verse 17 begins with a but. Despite what she wanted, despite what she communicated, she found herself in a situation not of her own choosing. A situation thrust on her by those in power and control. A predicament placed on her because the men of the cloth decided on her behalf without her voice or perspective. And even more importantly, without God. Maybe God had hidden from Elisha what was in the woman's heart long before he expressed it in verse 27. Yet the man of God made a decision and decreed not on behalf of God, but on himself. We've seen these prophets consult with God and commune with God. We've seen the annunciations of proclamations of a child, but God has been involved, not here. In verse 17, she conceives and has a son, just as Elisha described. Once we get to verse 18, several years have passed. In verse 19 through 20, we learn that her son grows ill while working in the field with his father. Unsure of what to do, they have brought the boy to his mom. The child lays on his mother's lap. She watches and holds her son until he dies. It is every parent's fear. It is the thing that keeps us up at night, that something beyond our control would happen to our loved ones. And we can see by her actions that will unfold that although this was not what she asked for, she cares for the child nonetheless. Her choice to embrace her son and what will follow shows even still an agency and choice to continue on. I don't know what her process was like during her pregnancy, but she made a kind of peace and embraced motherhood. Making peace is not the same as forgetting and pretending it didn't happen. She made lemonade. And beloved, unless you are making a lemonade like a diabetic elixir, it doesn't change the fact that there will always be a slight bitter ting to it. A little bit of aftertaste that is left over as a result of the situation you may have found yourself in. And we hear this echoed in her grief and her anger and frustration when she took a hold of Elisha's feet in verse 27 and tells him, "Didn't I tell you? Didn't I tell you not to raise my hope? Didn't I tell you I was okay? Didn't I tell you?" Yet and still she chose to make lemonade. In verse 20, we see that the woman that we met in verse 8, as she's beginning to move and proactively make decision, she responds like the prophet Elijah did when a woman's son died. In 1 Kings 17:9, she carries her son to the man of God's room. She lays him on the bed and shuts the door. She then calls her husband and tells him to get a servant and a donkey for her 6-hour trip to Mount Carmel. She lets him know she'll be back soon and it won't be as long as usual. When he asks why the urgency, what's the need to go, he reminds her that they go to see God on days of worship when it's time to offer a sacrifice. He doesn't see the need or necessity to go to God for other reasons. Even though he knows his son is sick, he doesn't know his son has died, but the woman knows. And she knows we need to go to God often to worship, to sacrifice, and when we are in need. She knows we need to go to God for ourselves, for our families, for others, and for our community. And while her response may seem evasive, it also communicates something within her. She tells her husband it's going to be all right. He doesn't know what is going on. Her response is enough because he gets the donkey and she saddles it. They have an understanding. And while he doesn't know what it is, he believes what she says and takes her at her word. He's been in relationship with his partner for a long time and has learned to trust her intuition and what she perceives. They have learned how to be an us, where neither of them diminish who they are in order to puff up the other, but so they both can live and thrive and shine. That's the hard part of marriage, allowing each other to be without thrusting our unspoken expectations upon one another. And so what we see in their interaction is a couple that gives each other agency. They are supporting one another throughout the story. They lean on each other and give space to the other. And also what we see in her response that is going to be all right is a hope and a declaration. And while her partner doesn't know what it is, she knows and declares it's going to be all right. She has a hope and a faith that this situation that is yet again beyond her control can be changed. And so she does what is within her control. She saddles her donkey, and that reminds us that sometimes there are preparations we need to make for our journey, even our journey towards God. She brings her servant with her, reminding us that we need someone to co-journey with us on the road because we aren't meant to go through tragedy alone. We aren't meant to hold it by ourselves. Sometimes we need someone else to go with us. And when we are invited into the process of someone's journey, we need to practice the ministry of presence. We need to learn to co-journey with them on their grief journey or whatever their journey is. And that means we let them take the lead and give us cues about what they need. And she tells her servant what she needs, which is not to slow down, but just to press forward. Right now, at this point, she needs to move quickly towards the man of God, towards the presence of God. The fact that she begins to move away from her current situation reminds us that our hope and faith need to be a living, breathing, acting hope and faith. It needs to be a hope and faith that moves us forward to seek the change we need in our life. It may require us to move away from what has been familiar, away from our people and community. It may require us to make decisions that to others does not seem to make much sense at all, but it requires us to move nonetheless. James 2:14-17 asks us, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill,' and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself has no works. It's dead." It is not enough for us simply to believe and have faith. Yes, faith and hope is important, and it ought to move us towards God. Faith and works go hand in hand. You need both, not one or the other. Her journey represents her taking a step forward. And what I think is interesting is on this 6-hour trip on the donkey, something changes in her phrasing and wording. When she left her home, she echoed Kendrick Lamar as he says, "We're going to be all right." His song, "All Right," is a response to all the violence he sees happening to his brothers and sisters at the hands of cops. He proclaims it would be all right, not because situations suddenly change. His proclamation is an acknowledgement of the pain, the way it hurt his identity and pride and led him down self-destructive patterns. His declaration is also a reminder that actions still must be taken for justice to come. His song became a chant in 2015, and it offered hope for folks as they continued to march and protest. This declaration that he made, like the woman, is one that allows us to journey with God in seeking healing and restoration for our family, community, and the world. It's going to be all right. And I don't know what her song, her chant, or prayer was as she rode for 6 hours, but whatever it was, by the time she gets to Mount Carmel, something has shifted within her. I don't know how much she cried and what her lament was. Maybe she cried out as Jesus did and asked why God had forsaken her. I don't know what her journey was, but it drew her near to God as night was drawing near to her. Knowing yet and still that it would be all right, she continued to push forward. I believe she met God on the journey, even though night was approaching. Because when Gehazi comes on behalf of Elisha to ask if she, her son, and her husband are all right, she has moved from "it's gonna be all right" to "it is all right" to saying "it is well." Her son is not healed when she declares this, and she keeps moving forward. She is committing to moving and hoping it will be, and it is all right. Also, I don't necessarily know that this narrative is all just about a son. I keep wondering what the son may represent. Does he represent the dreams of a future generation? I don't quite know. What does the son represent to you? Is it a promise, a hope, or a dream deferred that has dried up like a raisin in the sun? Is it a reality you can't see but keep longing and hoping for? For the Shunammite woman, it wasn't about the sun, but about a journey towards the holy place, towards the place where God would have been, towards the man of God. I believe she encounters God on that journey. And whether or not her son returns to her, she knows it will be all right. For me to say it's not about the son is not to dismiss the pain that comes from losing a loved one. I don't think she's dismissing it as well. The ache and pain doesn't ever fully go away when you lose someone you love. This "it's gonna be all right" that moves to an "it is all right" expresses an active hope and faith in a different reality that may no longer have our loved ones present in the here and the now. It is one that is marked by some level of loss that impacts us all. And we don't know how her son will even be changed by this experience, but he won't be the same. Neither of them. Death leaves its mark on us all. Anne Lamott says, "You will lose someone you can't live without, and your heart will be badly broken. And the bad news is that you never completely get over the loss of your beloved. But this is also the good news. They live forever in your broken heart. That doesn't seal back up, and you come through. It's like having a broken leg that never heals perfectly. That still hurts when the weather gets cold, but you learn to dance with the limp." September 15th will be my last day at Fuller as a result of all the layoffs going on. And even though I've gotten to be a part of the process, it doesn't minimize the loss. And I'm not comparing the loss of a job to the loss of a child. I highlight this to say we all experience different types of loss. We each have a different journey to take. And even though it wasn't always sunshine and rainbows at Fuller, there is still a loss that comes from leaving a place you've been at for 8 years. I realized through a lot of prayer and discerning that in this next season, I would take a leap of faith and launch my business. The excitement and hope I have does not take away the loss I feel as I step away from a community that has been involved in my life for nearly 2 decades. And so it had to mean that I've had to give myself space to grieve the loss while also looking forward to a future hope. It has had to mean I've had to tell myself it's going to be all right and believe it's all right, even though I have no idea what will happen. Even though restoration and healing from the pain has yet to come. I have had to figure out how to develop a business strategy and plan to implement so that it will come to pass. It's not a simple hope, but I have to have an active faith and hope and put in some effort. It means that I have to learn how to leverage my networks and step outside of my comfort zone, doing things that are new and unknown to me. And I've had to ask folks to co-journey with me on different legs of this journey because I can't do this on my own. It has meant riding into places and pressing into the presence of God as I transition. It has and will continue to be a journey that enables me to embrace who I am more fully. It's been a journey that has drawn me closer to God and to living as a more integrated person in my body, mind, and soul. This whole journey has helped me to see more fully and more truthfully who God is. This journey began long before I found out about the layoff. And it's been a journey that has coincided with these 6 long years in the doctoral program. It's been a long journey that has helped me to live into God's truth about my value and worth, and I know it will continue to be a journey. It has also meant me not waiting for doors to open, but trusting that God will make a way. Trusting that God will provide for me like he did 10 years ago when I was unemployed. I know he'll do it again. I know that the God who multiplied the fish and the loaves is the same God of today. I know that the God who's watched and met the needs of so many of my brothers and sisters during this time will meet me where I am. Yes, there is loss, and yes, there is hope. My phrase for the year has been daybreak. Sometimes I kind of pick a phrase to hope for and pray for. This year has been daybreak because I've been asking God to break through the night. I recently got this unexpected gift in the mail from my friend as she was celebrating me finishing school. And in the gift was a piece of chocolate, a candy bar. And the name of the candy bar was Daybreak. When I texted my friend to thank her, I had tears in my eye, and Kaylin was looking at me like, it's just a piece of candy, Mom. But it had so much deep meaning. She just knew I liked tea and chocolate. But it's the little things like this that I have to hold on to remind me that God sees and knows me and is conspiring on my behalf in ways I won't always see or know about. Even this morning, as I watched as the day broke in and the daylight shone through my kitchen window as I was literally editing this part of the sermon, God was reminding me that daybreak will come and it's gonna be all right, that it is all right. Beloved, like the Shunammite woman, we may find ourselves in situations beyond our control. We may have forces outside of ourselves acting upon our body. What we learn from her story is that God invites us into having a living, active hope and faith that doesn't diminish the pain. We are in the in-between. And in that in-between, there is space for both loss and hope to exist. We receive the promise that the kingdom is coming, and we keep looking for that, and we've got to hold on. And like the Shunammite woman who holds on to hope, we too must do what James instructed. We must do more than just hope and have faith. We must move as well. But beloved, it's not just about action alone. Action alone is what got the Shunammite woman into this situation. Elisha's thought about what should be done to and for her without consulting God is what created this situation. He relied on his gift so much so that he forgot about the giver of the gift. I wonder if that's why it took so much more than he was accustomed to doing before God used him as a vessel to bring the son back to life. I wonder what that conversation was like as Elijah got up several times and walked back and forth, pacing in that room as he tried to raise the boy from the dead. Maybe that room was Elisha's journey, a humbling moment for the leader of God, the holy man of God, to recognize that he needed God and to rely on God as well. Beloved, we are called to live an active, living hope and faith that moves us toward God and moves our community and people towards change, towards healing and restoration. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we bring in the kingdom of God with our action. What I'm saying is our faith is not simply about our salvation. Our faith and our hope needs to be alive and living and impacting not just our relationships with God, but it should impact our relationships with our family, our people, our tribe, our nation. That's what Jesus did. He transformed. He brought healing to the lame, restoration to the broken. He brought justice, equity, and equality. He reconfigured our imagination and made space at the table so that by seeing those on the margin, he brought all his folks to the table where they could each be fully seen, with no one story overpowering the other, where folks learn to step forward and back so equity could exist. Jesus' life broke in and through the world, ushering in a drastically different hope that he invited his disciples and invites us into today. Yes, it's personal and it's communal. Jesus is concerned not just about what happens to our souls, but what happens in our whole being, our body, mind, and soul. God is concerned about what happens in and through the earth. God is concerned about systems that oppress. He is and Jesus are concerned about it as well. That's why Jesus teaches us how to follow God, how to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly before our God. Our living, active hope and faith should impact how we advocate using our body and our voice. It should shape how we go to those in authority to seek restoration and healing. That's what the Shunammite woman does. She reminds the man of God of his promise and she holds him to his word. She uses her agency, her voice, her body, and demands the things that she needs to see happen. And she refuses to leave the place until he comes. We know how the story ends. We know that it ends with a "it was well." Her journey led the healing and restoration of much more than her son's life. It allowed so many people to encounter God, which reminds us that the son may represent something much more. I want us to spend just a few moments in breakout groups. James, you can put us in the same groups we're in this morning, but I want us to reflect on a few questions. And if you need a little space to reflect on your own, that's totally fine. Y'all know I'm an introvert. So here are the questions I want us to think about for a second, and we'll put them in the chat. What does the sun represent to you? What ways have you experienced loss and found yourself sitting on a Holy Saturday type of day? How is God inviting you into a living, active hope and faith? What might that look like for you? Y'all don't have to answer them all. You don't even have to answer any. Just think and reflect. James, you can go ahead and send us to rooms whenever you're ready. Beloved, I don't know what the sun represents for you. I don't know what you've lost and what may be next. But I want to encourage us that, like the Shunammite woman, to declare it's going to be all right. Not as a platitude, but from a deep well of knowing it will be all right. Because we're on a journey with God. Your restoration and healing may look different than others. Many of us are at moments, and it may that will require us to have an active, living hope and faith that allows us to declare we're going to be all right. It is knowing that God is present that will enable us to push and move forward with bruises that we don't need to hide, that will make us dance, make us limp even when we dance. Beloved, I pray that we know it's going to be all right. I pray that you say that over and over to encourage yourself. I pray that the healing, restoration, and hope we all need will come, even as we say it's going to be all right each and every day.